There was a man named Chijioke who had everything anyone could dream of. He was rich, handsome, and married to Amaka, a woman so beautiful that people often said she looked like she belonged in a movie. But lately, Chijioke wasn't happy. He had a feeling deep inside him, one he couldn't ignore. One sunny afternoon, he sat in his massive living room, staring at a painting on the wall. The painting showed a lion standing tall and proud, but Chijioke didn't feel like that lion. He felt small and uncertain. The sound of footsteps broke his thoughts. Papa, Chijioke called as his father, Chief Obinna, walked into the room. Chief Obinna was an older man with a kind face but sharp eyes that always seemed to see right through people. He wore a simple white kaftan and leaned slightly on his walking stick. Chijioke, my son, Chief Obinna said, sitting down next to him. Why do you look like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders? Talk to me. Chijioke sighed deeply. Papa, I've been thinking a lot about Amaka. I don't know if she really loves me for who I am or if she loves me because I'm rich. Chief Obinna raised an eyebrow. Why do you think that? Has she done something to make you doubt her? No, Papa. It's just a feeling. You know how she treats the staff sometimes? She doesn't shout at them when I'm around. But I've overheard her being rude to the housekeeper once or twice. And it got me thinking, what if she's pretending to be nice to me too? Chief Obinna leaned back in his chair, stroking his beard thoughtfully. That's a serious thing to think about, my son. But feelings are not enough. You need to know for sure. Chijioke nodded slowly. Exactly. But how do I do that? I can't just ask her, do you love me for me or my money? She'd never admit it even if it were true. The room was quiet for a moment. Chief Obinna tapped his walking stick lightly on the marble floor, a small smile creeping onto his face. I have an idea, he said. Chijioke looked at him with curiosity. What is it, Papa? What if we test her? Chief Obinna said, leaning forward. What if I pretend to be your gateman for a while? I'll live here, do the work, and see how she treats me when she thinks I'm just an old man working for you. Chijioke's eyes widened. Papa, you want to pretend to be a gateman? But you're a chief. People will think I've lost my mind, letting my own father work as a gateman. Chief Obinna chuckled. Don't worry about what people think. This is about finding out the truth. If Amaka is truly kind and respectful, she'll treat me well no matter who I am. But if she's only putting on a show for you, we'll know. Chijioke hesitated. The idea seemed crazy, but at the same time, it made sense. Papa, are you sure about this? It'll be hard work. And what if she finds out? She won't, Chief Obinna said confidently. I'll dress the part. No one will recognize me. And as for hard work, I'm not afraid of that. I've lived through tougher times than you can imagine. Chijioke nodded slowly. All right, Papa. Let's do it. But we need to plan this carefully. If she finds out, it'll ruin everything. Chief Obinna smiled. Don't worry, my son. Leave the details to me. The next day, Chief Obinna began his transformation. He went to a small tailor in town and ordered plain clothes, worn-out trousers, a faded shirt, and an old cap. He also bought a pair of dusty sandals that looked like they had seen better days. When he returned home, Chijioke couldn't believe his eyes. Papa, you look completely different. I wouldn't recognize you if I didn't know it was you. Chief Obinna laughed. Good. That means Amaka won't recognize me either. They went over the plan one more time. Chief Obinna would arrive at the mansion the next morning, introduced by the house manager as the new gateman. He would live in the small gatehouse at the front of the property, just like any other worker. Remember, Chief Obinna said, you can't treat me like your father while I'm working as the gateman. Act like I'm just another employee. I understand, Papa, Chijioke said. But promise me one thing, if it gets too much for you, we'll stop. I don't want you to suffer. Chief Obinna smiled. You worry too much, my son. I'll be fine. The next morning, everything went according to plan. The house manager introduced Chief Obinna to Amaka as Pa Obinna, the new gateman. Amaka barely looked at him, nodding curtly before walking off to the living room. Chief Obinna noticed her lack of interest but didn't let it bother him. He settled into the small gatehouse, a humble room with a bed, a chair, and a tiny table. It was a far cry from the grand rooms he was used to, but he didn't mind. This was all part of the test. As the day went on, Chief Obinna began his duties, opening and closing the gate, sweeping the driveway, and keeping watch over the entrance. Amaka passed by a few times but didn't say much. Her silence wasn't rude, but it wasn't warm either. Later that evening, Chijiok checked in with his father. They met in a quiet corner of the mansion, away from prying eyes. "How was your first day, Papa?" Chijiok asked. Chief Obinna chuckled. "It was interesting. Amaka didn't say much to me today, but I can see she doesn't think much of me. She barely looks at me when she walks by." Chijiok frowned. "Maybe she's just shy around new people. Let's give it a few days." "Of course," Chief Obinna said. "This is just the beginning. We'll see how she behaves as time goes on." As the days passed, Chief Obinna settled into his role. He made small mistakes on purpose to see how Amaka would react, like opening the gate too slowly or forgetting to greet her when she drove in. At first, she ignored the mistakes, but her patience began to wear thin. Pa Obinna, she snapped one afternoon when he didn't open the gate fast enough. "What is wrong with you? Do you think I have all day to sit in this car and wait for you to do your job?" "I'm sorry, madam," Chief Obinna said humbly, bowing his head. "You should be," she replied, rolling her eyes before driving off. Chief Obinna sighed as he closed the gate behind her. He had expected this, but it still stung to see her treat him this way. That evening, he met Chijiok again to report what had happened. "She's starting to show her true colors," Chief Obinna said. "She shouted at me today over something small. I stayed calm, but it's clear she doesn't respect me." Chijiok's heart sank. "Papa, I don't know what to say. I hoped she would treat you better. We'll see how far this goes," Chief Obinna said. "But remember, my son, the truth is better than living in doubt. Whatever we find out, you'll know where you stand." Chijiok nodded, feeling a mix of sadness and gratitude. He didn't like what he was hearing, but he was glad his father was helping him uncover the truth. And so, the test continued, with Chief Obinna playing his role and Amaka unknowingly revealing more of herself. What started as a simple plan was beginning to show cracks in a marriage that once seemed perfect. The next morning, Pa Obinna woke up early, just as the sun began to rise. The gatehouse was small and simple, but he wasn't here for comfort. He quickly got ready, putting on his worn-out trousers, a faded shirt, and a cap that barely fit his head. He looked at himself in the small, cracked mirror on the wall and chuckled softly. "Who would believe this is Chief Obinna?" he whispered to himself. As he stepped outside, the cool morning air greeted him. He looked around the grand mansion and smiled. It was hard to believe he was standing here as a gateman, not as the father of the owner. "Let's see how this goes," he muttered. By 7 a.m., Amaka was awake and bustling around the house. She had a habit of waking early, and today was no different. She wore a bright yellow dress, her makeup perfect, and her hair tied neatly into a bun. She stepped out of the house, holding her phone in one hand and her car keys in the other. "Pa Obinna," she called out as she walked toward the driveway. Her voice was sharp, loud enough for the staff inside the house to hear. "Yes, madam." Pa Obinna quickly walked to the gate, wiping his hands on his trousers as he approached her. "Where were you?" she asked, her eyebrows raised. "I've been standing here for over a minute, and you didn't even notice." "I'm sorry, madam," he said, bowing his head slightly. "I was sweeping the driveway." "Next time, pay attention," she snapped. "You're here to work, not daydream." "Yes, madam," Pa Obinna replied calmly. Amaka opened the car door and paused, looking back at him. "And make sure you clean the gate today. It looks dusty. I don't want my friends coming here and seeing dirt everywhere." "I will, madam," he said. Without another word, Amaka got into the car and drove off. The loud sound of the engine echoed as she disappeared down the road. Later that day, Amaka returned home earlier than usual. She had a few shopping bags in her hand and looked tired. Pa Obinna quickly walked to the gate to open it, but his hand slipped, and the gate didn't move as fast as it should. Pa Obinna! Amaka shouted from her car. What are you doing? Do you think I have all day to sit here? I'm sorry, madam, he said, rushing to push the gate open. Sorry for yourself, she muttered as she drove in, parking her car roughly. Pa Obinna stood by the gate, watching as she stepped out of the car. She didn't look at him again as she walked toward the house, her heels clicking loudly on the pavement. He sighed and closed the gate behind her. That evening, Chijioke called his father to check on him. They spoke in hushed voices in the small gatehouse to avoid being overheard. How did today go, Papa? Chijioke asked, sitting on the edge of the small bed. Pa Obinna sighed. Your wife is something else. She shouted at me twice today over little things. She doesn't even look at me like I'm a person. Just someone here to serve her. Chijioke frowned. I was hoping she'd treat you better. Maybe she's just stressed. Stressed or not, it doesn't excuse treating people badly, Pa Obinna said firmly. If this is how she acts around someone she thinks is just a gateman, imagine how she treats others when no one is watching. Chijioke leaned back, rubbing his forehead. Papa, I don't know what to say. I love Amaka, but this isn't what I expected. That's why we're doing this, my son, Pa Obinna said gently. We need to know the truth. And we're only just getting started. The next few days followed a similar pattern. Amaka's impatience grew with each passing day. Pa Obinna made small mistakes here and there, taking an extra second to open the gate, forgetting to sweep a corner of the driveway, and each time, Amaka's reaction was the same. Pa Obinna, are you serious right now? She snapped one afternoon when he was a bit late opening the gate. Do you think this is a joke? If you can't do this simple job, maybe I should find someone who can. I'm sorry, madam, he said humbly, keeping his eyes on the ground. You're always sorry, she muttered, shaking her head as she drove in. One evening, after dinner, Amaka was in the living room scrolling through her phone when the housekeeper approached her. Madam, the gateman said he needs new cleaning supplies, the housekeeper said softly. Amaka looked up, irritated. And why is he telling you to tell me? Can't he come and speak to me himself? I think he's afraid of disturbing you, madam, the housekeeper replied. Amaka sighed loudly. Afraid of disturbing me? He disturbs me every day with his incompetence. Fine, get him what he needs. But tell him this is the last time I want to hear about cleaning supplies. Yes, madam, the housekeeper said, quickly leaving the room. The next day, Amaka called out to Pa Obinna as she walked to her car. Pa Obinna, come here. Yes, madam, he said, hurrying toward her. I need you to wash my car. It's filthy, and I can't be seen driving it like this, she said, pointing at a tiny smudge on the side of the car. Yes, madam. I'll do it right away, he said. And make sure you do a good job, she added. If I see even one spot, you'll have to do it again. Yes, madam, he replied. Pa Obinna worked on the car for nearly an hour, scrubbing every inch of it until it gleamed. When Amaka came to inspect it, she found a tiny speck of dirt near the tires. Look at this, she said, pointing at the spot. Do you call this clean? I'm sorry, madam. I must have missed it, he said. Missed it? She repeated, her voice rising. I told you to do a good job, and this is what you give me? Clean it again. Yes, madam, he said quietly, picking up the cloth to start over. That night, Chijioke visited his father again. The gatehouse felt smaller than usual as they sat in silence for a moment. Papa, how was today? Chijioke finally asked. Pa Obinna shook his head. Your wife shouted at me over a tiny speck of dirt on her car. She made me clean it twice. Chijioke sighed. Maybe she doesn't mean to be this way. Maybe she's just under pressure. Pa Obinna looked at his son carefully. My boy, you need to open your eyes. This is not about pressure. This is who she is. The question is, can you live with it? Chijioke didn't answer. He stared at the floor, his mind racing. Let's keep going for now, Pa Obinna said. We'll see what else we uncover. But remember, the truth might not be easy to accept. Chijioke nodded slowly. I understand, Papa. Let's see where this leads. And so, the test continued, with each day revealing more about Amaka's true nature. Pa Obinna remained patient, determined to help his son see the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The sun rose quietly the next morning, casting a soft golden glow over the mansion. Pa Obinna was already awake, sweeping the driveway in slow, deliberate strokes. His back ached from the long hours of work, but he pushed through. It wasn't just the physical labor. Something about Amaka's words from the day before stayed with him. She hadn't yelled at him in anger. She had dismissed him as though he were invisible. Good morning, Pa Obinna, the cook greeted as she passed by, carrying a basket of vegetables. Good morning, my dear, he replied with a warm smile. It was moments like this that reminded him there was still kindness in the world, even in small gestures. The sound of heels clicking on the pavement broke the calm. Pa Obinna straightened and turned toward the source. Amaka was walking toward her car, a red handbag swinging at her side. Her expression was sharp, her eyes focused straight ahead. Pa Obinna, she called out without looking at him. Yes, madam, he said, setting the broom aside and hurrying to her side. Have you watered the plants today? She asked, gesturing toward the flower beds lining the driveway. I was just about to, madam, he replied. Just about to? She repeated, her voice rising. Do you know what time it is? Those plants should have been watered hours ago. What exactly have you been doing all morning? I'm sorry, madam, he said, bowing his head. I was sweeping the driveway. Well, stop whatever else you're doing and water them now, she snapped. And don't forget the roses. If they dry out, you'll answer to me. Yes, madam, he said quietly. Amaka clicked her tongue in frustration and got into her car. The engine roared to life, and she sped out of the driveway without another word. Pa Obinna watched her go, a heavy feeling settling in his chest. Later that afternoon, Pa Obinna decided to test Amaka further. He deliberately left a small spot near the gate and cleaned and waited to see if she would notice. When she returned home, he hurried to open the gate for her, bowing slightly as usual. But this time, she didn't just drive through. She stopped her car halfway and rolled down the window. Pa Obinna, she called out sharply. Yes, madam, he replied, stepping closer to her car. What is this? She said, pointing at the spot near the gate. He followed her finger, pretending to be surprised. Oh, I must have missed that, madam. I'll clean it right away. You missed it, she said, her voice dripping with disbelief. Do you even look at what you're doing? This is the second time this week I've had to point out your mistakes. I can't believe I have to waste my time telling you how to do your job. I'm very sorry, madam, he said humbly. Sorry isn't good enough, she said, her tone colder now. If this happens again, I'll have to find someone else. Do you understand? Yes, madam, he replied, bowing his head. She rolled up her window and drove off, leaving him standing by the gate. For the first time since he had started this test, Pa Obinna felt a twinge of sadness, not for himself, but for his son. That evening, Chijioke came to check on his father as usual. They met in the small gatehouse, their voices low. How was today, Papa? Chijioke asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. Pa Obinna shook his head. Your wife is not who you think she is, my son. Today, she threatened to fire me because I missed a tiny spot near the gate. She spoke to me as if I were less than nothing. Chijioke's face fell. Papa, maybe she's just stressed. Running the house, dealing with people. It can't be easy for her. Pa Obinna gave him a long, steady look. Stress doesn't give anyone the right to treat others badly. Think about it, Chijioke. If this is how she treats an old man she barely knows, how do you think she truly feels about those around her? Chijioke didn't reply immediately. He stared at the small wooden table in the corner of the room, his mind racing. Let's give it more time, he said finally, his voice quiet. Maybe she'll prove us wrong. Maybe, Pa Obinna said, though his tone carried little hope. The following day, Amaka decided to invite a few friends over for lunch. The house was buzzing with activity as the staff prepared for the guests. Pa Obinna stayed by the gate, quietly observing the flurry of movement. When the first car arrived, he opened the gate quickly and greeted the guests with a polite smile. "Good afternoon, madam," he said to the woman in the passenger seat. The woman nodded but didn't reply. Amaka came out to greet her friends, her voice cheerful and welcoming. "Welcome, welcome," she said, hugging the guests. "Come inside. Everything is ready." Pa Obinna watched as they walked past him, their laughter echoing through the driveway. Amaka's cheerful demeanor with her friends was a stark contrast to the way she treated him and the other staff. Later that afternoon, as the guests were leaving, one of them complimented the flowers by the gate. "Amaka, your flowers are beautiful," the woman said. "Your gardener must be very talented." Amaka laughed lightly. "Oh, it's nothing special," she said. "I just tell him what to do, and he follows my instructions. You know how these workers are. They can't think for themselves." Pa Obinna heard her words and felt a pang of disappointment. He had been tending those flowers with care, making sure they looked their best. Yet here she was, dismissing his efforts as though they meant nothing. That night, Chijioke found his father sitting outside the gatehouse, looking up at the stars. "Papa," Chijioke said softly, sitting beside him. "You look troubled." "I am, my son," Pa Obinna admitted. "Today, your wife spoke about me as if I were a child who couldn't think for himself. She doesn't respect anyone who isn't on her level, Chijioke. I'm starting to wonder if she even knows how to." Chijioke sighed deeply. "I don't know what to do, Papa. I want to believe she's a good person, but everything you're telling me, sometimes the truth isn't easy to hear," Pa Obinna said gently. "But it's better than living a lie. We'll keep going, my son. Let's see if there's any kindness in her heart, even if it's hidden." Chijioke nodded, though his heart felt heavy. He wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer anymore. And so, the days went on, each one revealing more cracks in the perfect image Amaka had built around herself. Pa Obinna remained patient, watching and waiting, determined to uncover the truth for his son's sake. The sun was already high in the sky when Amaka walked out of the house, her sunglasses perched on her nose and her phone glued to her ear. She was speaking loudly, her tone sharp and full of frustration. "I don't understand why they can't deliver it on time," she said, pacing near the driveway. "Is it that hard to follow instructions?" Pa Obinna stood near the gate, quietly sweeping. He listened but kept his eyes on the ground. He had learned to remain invisible when Amaka was in one of her moods. She ended the call abruptly and turned to him. "Pa Obinna." "Yes, madam," he replied, straightening up. "Have you watered the roses this morning?" "I did, madam," he said, his voice calm. She walked over to the flower beds, bending slightly to inspect them. "It doesn't look like you did. Look at these leaves. They're dry." "I'm sorry, madam," he said. "I'll water them again right away." "You better," she snapped, standing upright. "I don't want to repeat myself every day. If you can't handle these simple tasks, maybe I should find someone who can." Pa Obinna nodded quietly and went to fetch the watering can. As he watered the roses again, he couldn't help but think about how easily she dismissed people. Her tone, her words, they all carried an air of superiority, as if everyone else was beneath her. Later that day, Pa Obinna decided to push the test a little further. He deliberately left the gate open just a crack, enough to be noticeable but not enough to cause any harm. He wanted to see how Amaka would react to something small yet obvious. When she returned from running errands, she noticed the gate as soon as she drove up. She parked her car roughly, the tires screeching against the pavement, and stormed out. "Pa Obinna," she yelled, her voice echoing through the driveway. He hurried out of the gatehouse, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Yes, madam." "Why is the gate open?" she demanded, pointing at it. "Do you know how dangerous that is? What if someone came in? What if they stole something? Are you even thinking at all?" "I'm very sorry, madam," he said, bowing his head. "I must have forgotten to close it properly." "Forgotten?" she repeated, her voice rising. "You're here to protect this house, and you forgot to close the gate? What kind of gateman forgets to close the gate?" Do you even take this job seriously? I do, madam. It won't happen again, he said. It better not, she snapped. Because if it does, you'll be out of here. Do you understand? Yes, madam, he replied, keeping his voice steady. She shook her head in frustration and walked into the house, slamming the door behind her. That evening, Chijioke met his father in the small gatehouse. The air was heavy with tension as they sat across from each other. How was today, Papa? Chijioke asked, his voice low. Pa Obinna sighed. Your wife shouted at me again. This time, it was about the gate. I left it open on purpose to see how she'd react, and she didn't disappoint. She called me careless and threatened to fire me. Chijioke frowned. She shouldn't have spoken to you like that, Papa. But maybe she was just worried about security. It's not safe to leave the gate open. Pa Obinna leaned forward, his expression serious. My son, it's not about the gate. It's about how she treats people. She could have told me calmly to close it. Instead, she chose to yell and humiliate me. That says a lot about her character. Chijioke nodded slowly, his mind racing. I don't want to believe this, Papa. I love her. I know you do, Pa Obinna said gently. But love doesn't mean ignoring the truth. We need to keep going, my son. The test isn't over yet. The next day, Pa Obinna made another deliberate mistake. He spilled a bucket of water near the driveway, creating a small puddle that Amaka would have to walk around. He wanted to see how she would handle the inconvenience. When she stepped outside and saw the puddle, her reaction was immediate. Pa Obinna, she shouted, her voice sharp. Yes, madam, he said, hurrying over. What is this? She demanded, pointing at the puddle. Do you expect me to walk through water to get to my car? Are you even thinking at all? I'm sorry, madam, he said. I'll clean it up right away. Sorry isn't good enough, she snapped. You're old enough to know better. Do you know how embarrassing it would be if one of my friends saw this? I understand, madam. It won't happen again, he said, bowing his head. It better not, she said, crossing her arms. Because I'm running out of patience with you. Pa Obinna quickly fetched a mop and cleaned up the puddle, his movements slow and deliberate. As he worked, he couldn't help but wonder how someone so beautiful could carry so much anger inside her. That evening, Pa Obinna met with Chijioke again. This time, their conversation was heavier than usual. Papa, is there any chance you're being too hard on her? Chijioke asked. Maybe she's just having a rough week. Pa Obinna shook his head. My son, this isn't about 1 week or one mistake. This is who she is. She has no respect for people she thinks are beneath her. Today, she shouted at me over a puddle of water. A puddle? Chijioke. Is that the kind of person you want by your side for the rest of your life? Chijioke's face fell. He didn't know how to answer that. Papa, I don't know what to do. I love her. But everything you're telling me makes me feel like I don't even know her. That's why we're doing this, Pa Obinna said gently. Better to know the truth now than to live a lie. Chijioke nodded, though his heart felt heavy. He didn't want to believe what his father was saying, but deep down, he knew it was true. The days continued, each one revealing more of Amaka's true nature. Pa Obinna remained patient, determined to see the test through to the end. For Chijioke, every new revelation felt like a blow to his heart, but he knew he couldn't ignore the truth. The test was far from over, and the hardest part was yet to come. It was a quiet morning, and Pa Obinna was seated outside the gatehouse, sipping from a tin cup filled with lukewarm tea. The past few weeks had been challenging, not because of the work but because of what he had observed. Amaka's true nature was becoming clearer by the day, and he knew the time to reveal everything was drawing closer. As he gazed at the mansion, a sleek black car pulled into the driveway. Pa Obinna's heart lifted slightly. It was Chijioke. He hadn't seen his son in days, and while they had spoken over the phone, there was nothing like seeing him in person. Chijioke stepped out of the car, looking sharp in a tailored navy blue suit. His face, however, looked tired, his eyes showing signs of sleepless nights. He walked toward the gatehouse, giving his father a small nod. "Papa," Chijioke greeted softly. "My son," Pa Obinna replied, standing up. "It's good to see you." Chijioke glanced around, making sure no one was nearby before speaking. "How have things been? How is she?" Pa Obinna sighed. "It's the same, my son. Your wife's temper has not cooled. If anything, it's getting worse. She shouted at me yesterday because the car wasn't polished enough for her liking. I've done everything to remain patient, but her words are sharp, and her respect is nowhere to be found." Chijioke rubbed his forehead, a pained expression crossing his face. "Papa, I don't understand. She's not like this with me. She's always kind, always cheerful. How can she be so different with you?" "That's the mask she wears," Chijioke, Pa Obinna said gently. "But masks don't last forever. You're seeing her true face now. You asked for the truth, and here it is." Chijioke sank onto a nearby bench, his head in his hands. "What do I do, Papa? I can't just walk away from her. I love her. But how can I stay with someone who treats people this way?" Pa Obinna sat beside him, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You need to decide what kind of life you want, my son. Love is important, yes, but so is respect. Without it, love cannot stand. Let's keep going for now. Watch her yourself. See what I see." Chijioke nodded reluctantly. "All right, Papa, but I'll pretend to leave for another trip. That way, I can observe her without her knowing." Pa Obinna gave a small smile. "A wise decision. The truth will show itself, Chijioke. It always does." That evening, Chijioke packed a small bag and informed Amaka that he had to leave for another business trip. She didn't question him, only reminding him to transfer money into her account while he was away. "Don't forget, Chijioke," she said, her tone more demanding than loving. "There are some things I need to buy, and I don't want to run out of money while you're gone." "I'll send it," he replied, his voice flat. She kissed his cheek briefly, more out of habit than affection. "Safe travels," she said before heading upstairs. Once Amaka was out of sight, Chijioke quietly slipped into the gatehouse, where he would stay hidden while observing her behavior. The next morning, Amaka was in a particularly foul mood. She had misplaced her favorite pair of earrings and was convinced that one of the staff had taken them. "Pa Obinna," she shouted as she stormed into the driveway. "Yes, madam," he said, stepping out of the gatehouse. "Have you seen my earrings? The gold ones with the little diamonds?" "No, madam," he replied calmly. "Well, someone must have taken them," she said, her voice rising. "And if I find out it was you, you'll regret it. Do you hear me?" "I understand, madam," he said, keeping his tone neutral. "You'd better," she snapped before turning to the housekeeper, who had just stepped outside. "And you, search the entire house. I want those earrings found today." "Yes, madam," the housekeeper said, hurrying back inside. From his hidden spot in the gatehouse, Chijioke watched the scene unfold, his heart sinking further. He had never seen this side of Amaka before, and it was like watching a stranger wear her face. Later that afternoon, Pa Obinna deliberately made another small mistake. He forgot to lock the gate after the delivery truck left, leaving it slightly ajar. When Amaka noticed, her reaction was swift and severe. "Pa Obinna," she yelled, marching toward him. "Yes, madam," he said, stepping forward. "Why is the gate open?" she demanded, her eyes blazing. "Do you want thieves to walk in here and rob us blind? What kind of gateman forgets to lock the gate?" "I'm very sorry, madam," he said, bowing his head. "Sorry isn't enough," she snapped. "This is your last warning. If this happens again, you're fired. Do you understand me?" "Yes, madam," he replied quietly. From his hiding spot, Chijioke clenched his fists. He had heard enough. That evening, Chijioke met his father in the gatehouse. His face was pale, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and heartbreak. "Papa," he said softly, "you were right. I've seen it with my own eyes. She has no respect for you, or anyone else. How could I not have noticed this before?" Pa Obinna placed a comforting hand on his son's shoulder. "Sometimes, Love blinds us to the truth, my son. But now you see it. The question is, what will you do? I don't know, Chijioke admitted. I can't just end my marriage like this. But I also can't ignore what I've seen. Take your time, Parobina said gently. The answers will come. As they sat in the quiet of the gatehouse, father and son both knew that the hardest part of the journey was still ahead. But for now, they found comfort in each other's presence, preparing for the truth that would soon come to light. The morning of Chijioke's birthday started like any other day in the mansion. The house was busy with activity as the staff prepared for the celebration. Amaka, dressed in an elegant red gown, walked around barking instructions. Her tone was sharp, and her words stung as she spoke to everyone like they were beneath her. Make sure the table is spotless, she snapped at the housekeeper. And the flowers, arrange them properly. I don't want anything looking out of place. Yes, madam, the housekeeper replied quickly, avoiding eye contact. Parobina stood by the gate, watching the scene from afar. He had been quiet all morning, knowing that today would change everything. Chijioke, hidden in the gatehouse, had also been watching, his heart heavy with what was about to unfold. By noon, the guests began to arrive. Cars filled the driveway, and Parobina opened the gate for each one, greeting the guests politely. Most of them ignored him, too focused on their conversations or their phones to notice the old man in tattered clothes. Amaka greeted her friends warmly, her cheerful laughter ringing out as she hugged each guest. To them, she was the perfect hostess, gracious, kind, and charming. But Parobina knew better. When the party was in full swing, Chijioke stepped out of the gatehouse, his face calm but his eyes sharp. He walked into the house quietly, unnoticed by the guests. Inside, Amaka was busy entertaining, her smile bright as she chatted with her friends. Excuse me, everyone, Chijioke said, his voice cutting through the noise. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to him. Amaka's smile froze, her surprise evident. Chijioke, I thought you were out of town, she said, recovering quickly. I was, he said, his tone even. But I came back early. Today is, after all, a special day. Amaka's smile returned, though it looked forced. Yes, of course. Happy birthday, my love. We've been waiting for you to join us. Chijioke nodded, then turned to the guests. Thank you all for coming. Before we continue, there's something important I need to share. The guests exchanged curious glances, murmuring among themselves. Amaka's smile faltered slightly. What's going on, Chijioke? She asked, her voice uneasy. Chijioke gestured toward the door. Papa, please come in. All heads turned as Parobina stepped into the room. He was still dressed as the gateman, his tattered clothes a stark contrast to the elegant attire of the guests. The room erupted in whispers as the guests tried to make sense of what they were seeing. Amaka's face turned pale. What is this? She asked, her voice shaking. Chijioke stepped forward, his gaze fixed on her. Amaka, meet Parobina, the man you've been shouting at and disrespecting for weeks. The man you threatened to fire over small mistakes. The man you treated as if he were nothing. He's not just a gateman. He's my father. The room fell into stunned silence. Amaka's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She looked from Chijioke to Parobina, her face a mix of shock and fear. Your father, she whispered. Yes, my father, Chijioke said, his voice firm. I asked him to pretend to be a gateman to see how you would treat someone you thought was beneath you. And now, I know the truth. Amaka's eyes filled with tears. Chijioke, I didn't know. If I had known, I would have. You would have what? Chijioke interrupted, his voice rising. Treated him with respect? Is that what it takes for you to show kindness? Knowing someone is important or connected to me. What about the other staff? The housekeeper? The cook? Do they not deserve respect too? I didn't mean to. Amaka stammered, her tears now streaming down her face. Parobina stepped forward, his expression calm but his eyes filled with disappointment. Amaka, respect is not something you give only to those you think are important. It's something everyone deserves, no matter their position in life. You have shown me who you truly are, and it breaks my heart. Not just for me, but for my son. Amaka fell to her knees, sobbing. Please, Papa. Please, Chijioke. I'm sorry. I didn't mean any of it. I'll change. I promise. Just give me another chance. Chijioke looked at her, his heart torn. He had loved her deeply, but the woman kneeling before him was not the woman he thought he had married. The room remained silent, the guests watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. Chijioke took a deep breath, his voice steady but filled with pain. Amaka, I need time to think about everything. I don't know what the future holds for us, but what I do know is that respect and kindness are not negotiable. You've hurt me deeply, and it will take time to heal. Amaka nodded, her sobs quieting. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right, she whispered. Pa Obinna placed a hand on his son's shoulder. Take your time, Chijioke. The path forward won't be easy, but you must do what feels right in your heart. As Chijioke helped Amaka to her feet, the room remained silent, the air heavy with tension. The guests, who had come for a celebration, now found themselves witnessing the unraveling of a marriage. And as Chijioke and Amaka walked out of the room, the story left everyone wondering. Could love truly survive without respect? And could Amaka ever redeem herself in the eyes of the man she claimed to love? The answers would come, but not today. Today, the truth had been revealed, and it had shaken everyone to their core. The house was quiet after most of the guests had left. Only a few stayed behind, whispering among themselves, not sure if they should leave or stay. The air felt heavy, like a rain cloud about to burst. Amaka stood in the middle of the living room, her cheeks wet with tears. She looked tired, as if she had spent all her energy crying and begging. Chijioke stood a few steps away, his hands hanging at his sides. He looked at Amaka with sad eyes, as if he was seeing her for the first time. He didn't know what to say or how to feel. Everything he had learned in the past weeks was swirling inside his mind like a storm. He felt hurt, angry, and lost. He had loved this woman with all his heart, but now he wasn't sure who she really was. Nearby, Pa Obinna stood calm and firm. He rested on his walking stick, his old eyes steady and clear. He had seen many things in life, but this hurt him deeply because it involved his only son. He had hoped Amaka would pass the test, show kindness, and prove that wealth had not blinded her heart. But she had failed, and now here they all were, picking up the pieces. Amaka took a shaky step toward Chijioke. Her voice came out in a whisper, as if she were afraid even to speak. Chijioke, please, she said, her eyes wide and full of tears. I know I messed up. I know I was wrong. I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. Chijioke didn't move. He just listened, his heart heavy. He wanted to believe her, to trust her words. But he also remembered how she had treated his father, a good man who had done nothing wrong. He remembered the shouts, the insults, the threats. How could she do that and then say she was sorry only now that she knew the truth? Amaka, he said finally, his voice hoarse, you didn't just hurt me. You hurt my father. You hurt the people who work here. You hurt everyone who depended on your kindness. You showed no mercy to those you thought were beneath you. His words landed heavily in the silent room. Amaka's tears fell faster. I know, she said, her voice breaking. I know I was cruel. I know I was mean. I don't know what came over me. I was so caught up in my own world. I thought being strong meant being tough. I forgot how to be kind. I forgot how to treat people like human beings. Pa Obinna watched her carefully. He wanted to see if she truly understood her mistakes or if she was just afraid of losing her life of comfort. He stepped forward, his walking stick tapping softly on the floor. Amaka, he said, his voice steady but sad. Kindness is not something you remember only when you are in trouble. It is something that should live in your heart every day. You don't need to know someone's title or position to show respect. We are all human, and we all deserve to be treated with care. Amaka nodded, looking down at the floor. You're right. I failed. I did not treat you with respect. I did not treat others with respect either. Please, Papa. Please forgive me. She called him Papa for the first time since the reveal, her voice trembling. Pa Obinna looked at her for a long moment, then closed his eyes and sighed. Forgiveness is not just a word, my daughter, he said softly. It is something you earn by changing your ways. Words alone mean little if your heart does not change. Amaka sank down to her knees again, pressing her hands together as if in prayer. I will change, she said, sobbing. I promise. I will show kindness. I will show respect. I will do whatever it takes. I will make it right. Just don't leave me like this. Chijioke's throat tightened. He wanted to hug her, to comfort her, but he also felt wary. Could he trust her words now? Would she go back to her old ways when nobody was watching? His mind drifted back to the staff, the housekeeper, the cook, the driver. People who had done their jobs quietly and faithfully, only to be shouted at and looked down upon. They deserved better. He turned his head slightly and saw the housekeeper standing in the corner, tears in her own eyes. She had been yelled at so many times. The cook stood behind her, wringing his hands nervously. The driver stood near the door, unsure if he should stay. They were all here, watching, waiting to see if this was real or just another trick. Chijioke took a step toward them, and Amaka followed his gaze. Her eyes widened, and fresh shame washed over her face. She realized that she had not only hurt Chijioke and Pa Obinna, she had hurt everyone who worked in this house. She had made their lives hard for no reason. Please, she said, turning to them, her voice shaking. I know I don't deserve it, but please forgive me. I treated you badly, and I'm sorry. I will try to earn your trust again. I will show you that I can be better. I will respect you, I promise. The staff looked at each other, unsure what to say. The housekeeper sniffed, wiping her tears. She had grown old serving in different homes, and she knew people like Amaka came and went. But this one had shown a tiny spark of regret now. Could that spark grow? The cook cleared his throat. Madam, he said softly, if you truly want to change, we will see it in your actions. Words are easy, but show us with time that you mean what you say, and maybe we can trust you again. Amaka nodded quickly. I will, she said, her voice full of desperation. I know you don't believe me now. I will show you. I will work hard to earn back your trust. Pa Obinna watched this exchange quietly. He turned to Chijioke and placed a hand on his shoulder. My son, he said gently, the decision is yours. I cannot tell you what to do. This is your marriage, your life. But remember, respect must be the foundation of love. Without it, love is weak and can break easily. Chijioke felt tears form in his own eyes. He looked at Amaka, the woman he had once placed on a pedestal. He had thought she was perfect, but now he saw her flaws. Yet, he also saw her fear, her sorrow, and maybe even her shame. Could people change? Could she truly learn to be kind? Did he have it in him to give her another chance? Amaka, he said quietly, I won't lie to you. I am hurt. I am disappointed. I don't know if I can trust you again. But I will give you a chance to prove yourself. Not with words, but with actions. Her face lit up with hope. She reached out, but he took a small step back, lifting a hand to stop her. No, don't celebrate yet, he warned. This will not be easy. We will need help. We will need to see a counselor, someone who can guide us. We will need to do many things to fix this. I understand, she said quickly. I will do anything. Counseling, apologizing, giving more care to everyone here. I will do it. Pa Obinna nodded slowly, then looked at Chijioke. My son, I will leave you both to work this out. But know this, I will be watching from afar. Not to catch you in a mistake, but to see if your words turn into truth. Amaka, if you love my son, show him with kindness. Show him by treating everyone with respect. Amaka bowed her head. Yes, Papa, she said softly. I will earn your trust. Pa Obinna turned to leave, and the guests who remained cleared a path for him. His back was straight, and his head held high, as if to remind everyone that he was not just a gateman, but a man who valued honor above all else. Before he reached the door, he stopped and turned back. Chijioke, he said, My journey here is done for now. I will come back when the time is right. Until then, be strong and stay true to yourself." Chijioke nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. "Thank you, Papa," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for showing me the truth." With that, Pa Obinna stepped outside, disappearing into the night like a quiet shadow. The house felt different now, emptier, quieter, yet also filled with the promise of something new. Amaka stood still, not sure if she should run after Pa Obinna or hold her husband's hand. The staff watched her, waiting to see what she would do next. Would she go back to her old ways now that the storm had passed, or would she keep her promise? Chijioke studied her face. He could see the fear and sorrow there. He took a deep breath and spoke gently. "Come with me, Amaka," he said. "We need to talk." She followed him into a small sitting room, away from the eyes of the few remaining guests. He closed the door, and they stood facing each other. "I will give you a chance," he said softly, "but I need to see real change. We will get help. We will talk to someone who can guide us. You will treat our staff with kindness and respect. You will remember that we are all equal, and that money does not make you better than anyone else." Amaka nodded, her eyes never leaving his face. "I understand," she said. "I promise to try, every day, to be better. If I fail, I will get back up and try again." He nodded, reaching out to take her hand. "We can start fresh, but I won't forget what happened. We must build trust again. It will take time." She squeezed his hand gently, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I know," she said. "I will wait as long as it takes. I'm sorry, Chijioke. I truly am." He looked into her eyes, trying to see if her heart was sincere. For now, he would believe her words. But time would tell if she meant what she said. Outside, the night sky stretched wide, a million stars watching from afar. Somewhere out there, Pa Obinna was on his way home, his mind filled with thoughts of what he had seen. He had revealed his true identity, tested his daughter-in-law, and found her wanting. But he had also given her a chance to change, and sometimes that chance was the greatest gift of all. The staff slowly returned to their work, cleaning up after the party that had turned into a moment of truth. They whispered among themselves, wondering if the mistress of the house would keep her word. The guests who remained finally said their goodbyes and left, uneasy but curious about what would happen next. In the small sitting room, Amaka and Chijioke stood side by side, holding hands. They had a long road ahead of them. The journey would be filled with challenges, doubts, and hard work. But it might also lead to understanding, forgiveness, and a love built on respect. As the night deepened, a calm hush fell over the mansion. Amaka knew that she had escaped losing everything by the smallest thread. Now she had to prove her worth, not just to Chijioke and Pa Obinna, but to herself. Could she really change? Could she become the kind of person she should have been all along? No one knew the answer, not yet. All they had were hopes, promises, and the flicker of light in Amaka's eyes that might glow brighter if she truly tried to be better. The story did not end here. It hovered, like a question mark in the night, leaving everyone wondering what would happen next. Would Amaka earn their trust again? Would Pa Obinna return one day to find her changed? Would Chijioke's broken heart mend? And would their love grow stronger than before? Only time would tell. And so, as the lights in the mansion slowly dimmed, the stage was set for a new beginning. The world outside waited, silent and patient, as this family found its path toward healing. They stood at the edge of a story that had not yet been fully written, leaving everyone who had witnessed it wanting more. Thanks for watching. Here is another interesting story to watch. Click to watch now.